are listening to Neurosalience, the OHBM podcast. Welcome to OHBM Neurosalience. You may have noticed some different sounds. That's because we're kicking off season 2. And today's episode content will be a bit different to normal. I'm chatting to Peter about the experience of the podcast so far. So before we get started with that, I wanted to mention who has been involved in making this podcast. Peter has put in a lot of work contacting guests, preparing for interviews, carrying out the interviews, and really keeping up the momentum by recording regularly. And then there's a production team, mostly of early career researchers that have been taking care of the editing and the publishing. And these people include me, Rachel Stickland, Anastasia Brovkin, Ekaterina Dobrikova, Katie Moran, Niels Mullert, and Kevin Setek. And also thanks to Rosalind Chauvin for adapting the OHBM logo into our great podcast logo. So all these people are members or contributors with the OHBM Communication Committee, often called ComCom. And there are also many other people in ComCom that have supported this podcast and contributed ideas to help get it up and running. We talk about that a little bit in the chat, me and Peter, but to give you an idea of what ComCom is. So ComCom works to improve communication both within and beyond the OHBM community, creating content for the OHBM blog, podcast, social media, reporting about current topics in our community and the field. If you don't know much about this committee, there is actually a recent blog post on the OHBM website that tells you all about it in the form of a chat with past and current chairs and chair-elects. They even talk about how the idea for the podcast came about and some of their thoughts on it. The OHBM blog website is ohbmbrainmappingblog.com. If you have thoughts for future episodes, share them with us by emailing ohbmbrain@gmail.com. We've had about 20 episodes. Well, we've had 20 episodes released since March of this year, which is pretty good progress. And we're not going to give a detailed summary of them here today, but we could summarize just together the types of ones we've had. So kind of I can get us started and we can just give the listeners an idea of maybe what's been covered. So feel free to jump in, but I made a little kind of list. So yeah. You've had some in-depth discussions with, individuals and groups of individuals that are kind of really leaders in their field, talking about their careers in science, as well as their kind of perspectives on where the science is going. And I think, that's kind of one of the types of episodes we've had. But then I think there's been a couple of common themes I pulled out. So you've kind of had some debates or discussions on the kind of efficacy of fMRI as a tool, just in general. About reproducibility and best practices for data sharing. We spoke a bit about publishing platforms, even got into kind of scanner hardware and the vendors that, make the scanners, like you spoke to a few of them. And then I think lastly, kind of a general category is like OHBM as an organization, and around the OHBM conference, you spoke to some keynote speakers, some award winners, and also some special interest groups as well. Yeah. Do you think that covers most of it?
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. I think that, we definitely have focused on exactly everything you said as far as the topics, the people, the issues, and the organization itself. Right.
Great. Yeah, and obviously, hopefully people have listened to some of these episodes already, but maybe that will encourage people to look back at the previous season, if not. So maybe let's start with a kind of open question for you. So how have you found making the podcast so far?
Yeah, I found it actually a lot of fun. I mean, it's actually, it's both more work and that I expected, but at the same time, the amount of, it's really stimulating, at least, for me in preparing for it. I try to read papers and keep up on the literature in general, but this is sort of another level of engagement. And certainly when I interview the guests, I like to do my research on them and also the whole process of trying to think of the right questions to ask and how to hit that point. Like one thing I was going to bring out with all these topics is that, you really want to, the field, talking about a field is sort of a tricky thing, because it's like not only the science and, people just do the science, but it's also, there's the edge of the science where people don't really know what the best thing to do is. And there's things that they don't really know about, what there might be some controversies, but also, we're all human and we're all just people doing the best we can, and trying to figure out ways of bringing out the human side of everyone, from the postdocs up to the full professors and the old people, including myself. And I say old people with it's I usually spend about, so practically speaking, I would spend, the sort of a week or so preparing, just reading papers and generating questions, and depending on how busy I was in other things, I would send them the questions ahead of time, and then go from there. And it usually would really work out well as far as that's concerned. So yeah, it's been a lot of work, but it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun.
That sounds like a lot of hard work, but I guess it must be rewarding if you keep on doing it then.
Yeah, and one thing that's totally rewarding, I mean, obviously this came up in the context of during COVID, and everyone feels sort of isolated. And I feel like, reaching out to these people, it sort of helps people. I would like to think that it helps people sort of stay in touch with those in the field and the issues in the field, as opposed to just reading papers or just seeing talks online or things like that. So yeah. I think that I'd like to think that helped people. It certainly has helped me. I mean, I have all these, I realize, most of these people, and this might be later in the discussion, but most of these people I kind of know in some level, not all of them, but, and it's kind of nice to catch up.
Yeah, no, I had a couple of thoughts about that, because I think this podcast and just generally a lot of the kind of, virtual events we've been having during COVID, it has made me feel a little bit more connected to that kind of wider neuroimaging community. And obviously we get that from going to conferences, but I think we've just had a lot more, like I've been attending a lot more kind of international webinars and kind of events, and just, I think I've been aware of that a little bit more. So I definitely think that the podcast has done that too. And I mean, I wanted to mention actually that I've enjoyed those kind of honest discussions you've had with people. And for me, it helps me put like, a voice to a name and a personality to a name that, people that I've only seen as authors on papers or giving a more kind of structured talk. So I've enjoyed that. I guess you said you've known quite a lot of the people you interviewed beforehand, which is great. But so maybe for other people, it just helps us contextualize them a little bit more.
Yeah, and I've always found that I mean, the dangerous part is if I know them too well, or if I know their area too well, like if it overlaps a lot with what I do, I'm always worried a little bit about sort of digging into the details too much, and it usually seems that the people whose work is a little bit outside my comfort zone, I'm able to sort of pitch it such that it hits a more hopefully a more broad audience. And so that's also, but certainly knowing them helps with the familiarity. It's a lot of fun in that regard. Yeah.
And I think that's what people hope from I guess the podcast format is just that you can have that slightly more unstructured chat. I mean, like if we want to know about people's science, we can we can just go to a talk or read their papers. So I think it kind of has to be more than that, doesn't it? It has to be about the science and them and their perspective and all of the thoughts that you want to write in a paper that you don't put in. It's only the science. So I think that's good. That's what's good about this format, So that's good. I mean, I wanted to pick up on one kind of theme, I guess, that I think was in a couple of the episodes. I mean, obviously there's quite a lot, but I think it came up a lot that, we really do have a lack of clinical application for fMRI. And also we have kind of reproducibility crisis. topics about lack of diversity in common like neuroimaging spaces. So these are all very, diverse topics. But I guess I wanted to ask you, after discussing these types of things with people, did you feel more hopeful or more disheartened, or a bit of the two, bit of both?
Yeah, I think, one of the key things is that my perspective was definitely broadened on all of them. And so you not only get aware of the magnitude of the challenge, you also get it's heartening to know that there's people working on all of these things and thinking deeply and carefully about many of these issues. I mean, everything from, right. I mean, I think a lot about clinical. I always, everyone sort of works in their silo in some sense. And like, for instance, clinical applications of fMRI, I talk to people about that a lot. And it seems like sometimes the people I talk to haven't really thought about it that much. They just are doing their thing. Everyone's kind of doing their thing. But when you really try to press people on a podcast about it, you realize people, are thinking practically about it. Like for instance, there's people like Michael Fox, for instance, who's really trying to use fMRI in some way day to day with his patients. And you have many other people who are, like, for instance, Ahmad Harari. One thing about that podcast that was really kind of cool is that if you read his paper, I think it's very easy to have thought like, oh, wow, he's just bashing the field. But then when you talk to him, he's like, no, he really cares about getting it right, and he's hopeful, and he has ways of doing it. And so I think that you get a little bit of a hopeful sense that that people are working on these things. So I think overall, I'm very, if anything, it's made me more optimistic about most everything. I mean, even things like looking at diversity. I was blown away when talking to some of the SIGs, how much effort is being put into OHBM to establish this, and blown away in a really good way. I mean, it seems that a lot of people who just go to the meeting, they focus on certain things, and seeing the work that's being done to make OHBM more of a welcoming, diverse community was very eye-opening and very heartening, and hopefully that spread that message pretty well.
Yeah. I think people are putting in some really hard work on that, and I think it's easy to just say we need better representation and more diversity, but it seems like people are really trying to work out the clear, actionable things to do, not just saying it, I guess.
Yeah. And speaking of actionable things, I mean, that's one thing also interviewing Danny Bassett, for instance, of course, I have to say that as I was preparing for her work, I'm reading her papers and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be, I have to, it's really hard. I mean, it's, I mean, she's been doing some amazing work that's a little bit outside of my areas of expertise. And so I probably worked very hard to prepare for that. But at the same time, she has these papers on, characterizing bias in references. And so that was actually, I mean, people are, very, very smart people are adding, collecting metrics and pushing transparency to their work in that regard too. So that was great as far as and heartening to see that that's being done.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, that's good. Well, I'm glad that you're feeling more hopeful than disheartened, maybe aware of some of the challenges a bit more, but that's good. I mean, you mentioned, I guess, about the process already of like getting guests for this podcast, and I mean, you've spoken about like your prep for that. How have you been going about getting those guests and like inviting people? I guess it's been a little bit of a team, like people have suggested podcasts to you, but I think you've done a lot of the reaching out to people. I guess it's just people that you kind of know in the field and think would make an interesting chat.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird optimization. I'm always trying to sort of keep my eye on interesting controversies or interesting issues, or like the sticking points, like clinical applications of fMRI, or how useful is neural modeling to, is it really going to understand the brain or be used to understand the brain? Or even like, coming up is Melanie Boley, who, looking at consciousness. I mean, that's kind of a wide open sort of thing. So I've been trying to, the way I do it, it's actually kind of ad hoc. I mean, I certainly, we've had many discussions and with the whole production team, about what might be, and I have this spreadsheet and everyone sees it, and what might be useful topics, useful people, interesting people to talk to, and that's been really helpful. Sometimes it's just ad hoc, and I'm thinking, oh wow, maybe I should just. And usually about once a week, once every 2 weeks, I come up with like a batch of people in my head, and I just start shooting out emails and some sort of, if been working hard, if I'm in some sort of manic state, I just shoot out a bunch of emails, and surprisingly, just about every single person has said yes. Only had a couple people who said no, and I think partially, I don't know why exactly, but partially because maybe they prefer to. They're very careful in what they say, and they figure the spontaneous form of a podcast is a little risky. That's what people like about it, though, is you might say something that you kind of regret. But I always tell people that we can edit things out if they want to as well. But but overall, I've been lucky. Every single person almost I've asked has said yes. So
that's great. Yeah, that's why we've been recording so many. That's great. And actually, that brings us on a little bit to kind of the season 2 that we're looking ahead to. I know we do have some of those episodes already recorded. I didn't know if you wanted to maybe kind of let us know a little bit about them, or
sure,
what we had coming up.
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about. I saw. Okay, so so I've interviewed Nicola Stickoff, who is a pioneer in structural imaging. He's been very involved in ISRM and OHBM. He's very much a person who has been sort of leading the field in terms of publishing, and in terms of sort of thinking about publishing, in terms of thinking about how to best, he wants to revise the how we publish papers and that sort of thing. So he was great. He's actually been he was sort of an initial inspiration to this whole podcast, actually, because, he had a podcast of his own, and I initially talked to him, potentially got some great advice for him as to how to get this whole thing going in the first place. Jack Gallant is coming up, and we have 2 podcasts with Jack, and just to let everyone know, the first one was I wouldn't say contentious, but it was a little bit more
lively.
Lively. And I thought, we didn't quite even begin to get to what I really wanted to talk about with Jack. And so I kind of contacted him again. I said, hey, let's try this again. And the second one was, they were both great, but the second one sort of covers a broader range of topics.
Okay.
And there's other ones too, like Javier Castellanos is person who, was won the Mentor Award one year, and he had a lot of fun talking with him about the history of things, with in terms of how things got started with him. And we also talked with people who were starting up open science. This is at Max Planck Institute for Cognitive and Brain Sciences, and starting up their own grassroots open science sort of efforts. And also I mentioned Melanie Boley, but also I've also interviewed the AFNI team with Bob Cox, and just to kind of, that seems like at first glance, it's like, oh my gosh, it's a dry podcast just about AFNI. It's about a processing platform. But if anyone knows Bob, Bob's a character, and his team is really interesting, and they have their own perspective about how to do things. And it's a lot of fun to get that information. So those are a few people that I interviewed. I have a bunch of other people lined up. And so, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
be a lot of fun.
That's great. Yeah, so yeah, lots to look forward to there, and obviously, yeah, you're going to be recording more shortly as well. And I guess one thing I wanted to talk about, I guess it relates to kind of future podcasts, is the Anchor is the podcast platform we use, and it tells us some stats, which I think it tells us that most of our listeners are in the US, about 40%. About 10% in the UK and Germany, and 5% in Canada and Australia. I've just grouped a couple there. I guess the other places are like 1 to 2%. If we trust these stats, which I haven't validated them in any way, I guess I was just wanted to brought up as a bit of a discussion point, maybe how could we engage like more widely? I guess it's just mostly US listeners that we have.
Yeah, it seems like it's mostly US, and certainly I would love to have this podcast go even beyond the OHBM community.
Yeah.
I feel I'm still learning the ropes as far as how to best do this, but I feel that the content is very accessible to people even not in brain imaging. But definitely, yeah, I'm actually a little confused too. Why it's so heavily weighted towards U.S. citizens. I don't know if it's a cultural thing that people just listen to podcasts more in the U.S. I don't think so.
No. Well, maybe we just need to get better at our tweeting and tagging and sharing it around. Maybe we'll try harder with that this season.
Sharing it and advertising it in some ways. I mean, maybe the tweets, maybe people who follow my tweets or your tweets are mostly U.S. citizens. I don't know. Maybe we should try to. I'm completely open to any ideas as far as that's concerned. And also just to add, I mean, you might mention this as well, that I'm completely open to. I'm very open to having the community give me any ideas about what they want to talk about, or who they would like interviewed, or whatever. So
I think we're going to include an email address at the start or at the end of this chat, so yeah, people can feedback some ideas maybe about if they have them. Okay. Well, maybe as a team we can brainstorm our ways of kind of reaching
and also
broader audience.
It might be interesting to not to have turned this into a brainstorming session as a podcast, but I know that ISMRM doesn't really have a podcast, and so maybe trying to either tap into that or tap into other maybe make it a joint, not really formally a joint effort, but sort of be inclusive of other groups a little bit more too, just in terms of the guests or whatever. So
that sounds good. I mean, I guess another question I had, which is related to kind of the going forward. I was reflecting on the fact that I think I'm right in saying that the kind of OHBM community and like the members are kind of majority early career researchers. Is that right? I think so. And so I think it's really good that you interviewed some of those special interest groups around the time of the annual meeting. Like, we got to hear, you mentioned them, already, we got to really hear some of the great initiatives that they had. And I think a lot of those kind of special interest groups were early career researchers. And I mean, I was just reflecting on it, and I think, early career researchers are probably a bit more nervous coming onto a podcast and talking about themselves and their science. And, maybe having a group of people was a little bit kind of strength in numbers. But I don't know, just be good to think of ways to engage, I guess, people at those different career levels, and making sure that we're hearing those voices, which hopefully people think, agree that we have been so far, which is nice. So I just didn't know if you had any thoughts on that kind of topic.
I'd like to include more early career researchers as well, because I think actually a lot of people can learn a lot from them. I certainly have in the sense of, I mean, the whole field, I mean, the essence of the field is driven by postdocs and driven by graduate students. It's, the leaders, are the people who did that, and they still sort of, they sort of direct programs, but the people who actually are there figuring stuff out and doing the work and doing the coding and doing the processing are mostly postdocs and graduate students. And so, and not only that, I feel that there really has been a cultural shift in a good way in terms of focusing on more of the social aspects and most focusing on diversity and focusing on open science. And that's actually, it's very tangible when you talk to early career researchers about this, because they feel it very strongly, because they've probably downloaded a ton of data and they've worked with it, or else they're quite aware of issues in their department or whatever. So much more so, I feel, than I don't consider myself old, but even when I was younger, much more so than I ever thought about things like that. I just wanted to, figure out what I'm going to do and write my thesis, and early on. So yeah, I think it injects some energy into the field to sort of let their voice be heard a lot more. And yeah, you're right. They're a little bit more, I feel, slightly nervous. I try to, for myself at least, I try to, make it fun. And I guess the more people who go on, it might be more fun in that regard.
Yeah.
And I always assure everyone when I'm interviewing them that, right, if there's any place that they need to be edited, just let us know and we'll take it out. So.
Yeah, so maybe that's another place we can, kind of talk to the team and think of ways we can, because a lot of that content was around the OHBM annual meeting, which was, made a lot of sense, but maybe going forward, we can think of other ways of kind of, getting people involved.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a couple, I think we're coming to the end really of like maybe some of the questions I had at least, but maybe it relates to something you just said. I mean, do you find it nerve-wracking kind of putting your voice out there and your perspective sometimes? I mean, like I mentioned that early career researchers and myself, I find that a little hard, but what about you?
It's actually kind of a weird, it's like giving a talk in some sense, where, I mean, the hardest part with the whole thing has been when I started, I press record, I say, okay, now we're recording. And then I have a hard time sort of like, all right, well, then I fumble around a little bit. And luckily most of that gets edited out, I think. But that's the hardest part for me. And then just like if you're giving a talk to an audience, I've often found that you kind of get into a zone and you kind of get a connection with the person, and you've looked at your questions and you kind of know what you're going to say, but at the same time, something comes up and it's sort of like it kind of gets into it. You kind of get keyed up for it, and then you start. Hopefully, it's kind of flows, and then I'm usually ends up totally exhausted at the end, but kind of keyed up in a good way. So I don't find it. Yeah, I find it. Like I said, hard to get started, but then fine. And I usually I do think that if I actually thought about it, maybe I would be a little bit more nervous. But I usually my goal is, at least when I interview people, is to try to come across as sincerely as possible. Like even in our lab meetings, I'm usually just asking questions because I have a question. I'm not trying to put forth any agenda or anything like that. I'm not trying to make someone look good or bad or whatever. I'm just asking questions. And luckily I feel like the questions I ask sort of resonate with other people. Like they've sort of had a form of that question anyway. And so I think it seems to work. It seems to work.
No, I definitely think you achieve that. I think that, sometimes people do ask questions just because they want to ask someone a difficult question, but it definitely doesn't, that's not the case. With how you've been doing it. So no, I don't want to make you feel you're going to overthink everything now.
No,
I was just
right.
Interested. I think, as something I mentioned to you, we won't go into too much details, but I think it would be great to have someone on the team interview you in the long form, and so maybe that would be a fun addition. But I guess as we're wrapping up, I just thought maybe I would ask you kind of just so the listeners get a feel for kind of what's interesting you most with your science now, and what you're working on, or just like a little teaser for that.
Yeah. So I've been sort of doing fMRI method development, and that for now it's going to be, actually, I just found out that September 14th, 2021 will be precisely 30 years after my first successful fMRI experiment. I remember I put someone in the scanner, or actually I jumped in the scanner, and it took a couple of days for it to work, but we had this set up, and we got it going. And that was literally 30 years ago. It's sort of mind-boggling to me that it's that long. 1991, yeah. So what I'm doing now is still more the same. So right now we're working at very high field. We're trying to go to, half of my group is trying to push methods for doing layer-specific fMRI. The other half of my group is doing trying to find better, robust ways of time series analysis and paradigm design, like naturalistic stimuli, trying to pull information about individual subjects out. The thing that excites me is I feel like with MRI, and probably with other techniques, there's always more information in the time series. And it's just a matter of, you have a control over the paradigm, you have control over some of the contrast, especially with MRI, and you have control over processing. And it's such a wide space that there's so much more information to get. So that's kind of what my group is working on right now. And I run our core facilities at the NIH, and that keeps me busy just to sort of keep things going. There's a bunch of other things that I try to keep my fingers in a little bit, and and I'm intrigued by a lot too, but obviously my group isn't big enough to do everything. So
yeah, no, thanks. I think that I think it would be great to maybe delve into a bit more of those details on a future podcast.
Sure.
I mean, I just had one more question, but feel free to raise anything else if you think we've forgotten anything. I don't know. Do you listen to many podcasts yourself? Like,
yeah.
Do you want to tell us?
No, it's funny. I usually listen to podcasts. I usually, run or work out every day. And so I'm listening to them when I do that. And it's funny. My favorite podcasts are things like, there's this one that came out where, I listen to them also, especially when I'm in the middle of interviewing people. I try to listen for, their style and how they get pointers, and they said that first. Okay, I should try, try to figure out the right way to organize things or whatever. But I listened to one of my favorite ones so far that has really cool guests is called the Lex Friedman podcast. It used to be called AI. It's all about it's all about everything, actually. He interviews these prominent people in the field that just talk about the interface of AI and brain science and other things too. It gets crazy. There's this guy, Tim Ferriss, who's a lot of fun. He goes everything from health to business to whatever. Paul Middlebrooks is sort of overlaps a little bit with this podcast, doing Brain Inspired. And there's other things like Sam Harris, Making Sense podcast. I enjoy listening to. And also this guy, Peter Attia. He has this podcast called The Drive. It's basically all about health and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of I enjoyed, those are my main ones, and I don't like to, I think I would love to get, it's funny, I listen to some of the guests and I'm thinking I'd love to get some of the guests that they have. I mean, just to go outside of the normal OHBM thing, but we'll see what happens. Giving
you good ideas. Well, some recommendations for the listeners. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay. I think was there anything else we wanted to mention? Any other thoughts you wanted to get out, or do you think?
Well, I just also wanted to mention that yeah, the next season is still, we're still in the process of inviting guests, and I definitely am keeping my eye on not only having a broad spectrum of people from a wider diversity of countries. I'm also trying to cover different modalities as well, not just fMRI, which I'm sort of biased towards, but also trying to keep my eye on what people what people really do care about. What are the issues? Not just sort of stuff, but like what can we talk about to try to make progress on something? So it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun.
Great. Well, thanks for all your hard work on it so far. It's been great to be involved. I've been learning a lot. So.
Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for all the work. I mean, definitely, my job is kind of easy relative to everyone. I mean, I just basically interview them, and then have a good conversation. But then I send it off to you and the production team that make it into something, do the work to properly package it. And so it couldn't be done without you as well.
Okay.
So
thanks.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're good. Actually, it was quite a bit longer than last time's chat, but hopefully that's okay.
Well, hopefully, people will listen to this one and they'll be looking forward to this season, because I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Neurosalience is brought to you by the Organization for Human Brain Mapping and is produced by Anastasia Brovkin, Ekaterina Dobrikova, Katie Moran, Niels Mullert, Kevin Seatek, and me, Rachel Stickland.